is everyone's friend, it's Tyler. He's your only black friend, so he's your best black friend. I wouldn't trade him for another black friend, because black friends are rare, as you should be aware. He smiles like Richard Pryor, so just sit and stare. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler.
Welcome to Bible Hard Talks, where we delve into some of the most profound and contentious issues in philosophy of religion, in politics, in morality, in ethics, you name it. Today, we will be having this conversation about the notion that the Christian God is the sovereign ruler of the universe. We are saying the Christian God because at least we know in the Bible it is highlighted clearly that God at least is portrayed as the ruler, the sovereign ruler of the universe. That's why we are using the Christian God there. We're giving the caveat, the Christian God. There is a push and pull when it comes to this conversation, not just between believers and unbelievers, even between believers themselves amongst each other. There is a push and pull when it comes to this conversation. And therefore, tonight, we want to at least have an idea how exactly should we understand this matter? How should we have at least a bit of a grounding when it comes to this matter? This topic is not only, of theological significance, but also it has profound implications for our understanding of political authority, moral responsibility, and human history, and so on and so forth. Now, if we were just to look at the outline, but of course time will not permit us, but if we were to look at the outline of this conversation tonight, we would somehow, in a way, postulate that we need to have, or we need to talk about divine sovereignty and the omnipotence of God, as the Christian God is described as omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, pressing the ultimate authority over all authority, or over all creation, that is. Biblical foundation, moral order, and justice. All these things, when you tie them together, it gives us a clue. It gives us a picture of what exactly we're supposed to look at, or we can touch upon when we have to do justice in looking at this topic before us. But you know what the good thing is? The good thing is that, for a coin to be a legal entity, it needs to have both sides. As much as we can have the positive dimension of this conversation, there is also the other dimension that makes people have some quandaries, have questions. How exactly should we look at this matter? I mean, sometimes I even worry when I'm doing this introduction because I'm afraid of giving away some of the things that, are there. But I would leave it like this. I would leave it at this, that there is, in as much as there is the positive dimension when looking at this matter, there is also the other side that we must be able to deal with if we are saying that God is the sovereign ruler of the universe. Of course, we've had already postulations, we have heard kind of stances being taken here tonight as to which direction could possibly this conversation could possibly go. But what's the focal point here? Is God the sovereign ruler of the universe? Is all government on earth from God? That's what we are. That's what we are dealing with tonight here on Bible Hard Talks. And my apologies that we don't have questions. I feel so bad that I forgot that we used to have questions on Bible Hard Talks. That's really, 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 really bad. But we can somehow play around with some ideas in terms of questions. For example, a question that we can look at, question number one, when we're dealing with this matter, is when we is looking at issues of divine sovereignty and the free will, human free will, that is. How do we reconcile the notion of God's sovereignty over governments with the concept of human free will and moral responsibility? I'll try to put this up, maybe 2-3 conversations. Not conversation, but questions throughout the conversation as the conversation is running, so that we can have an idea, follow a certain pattern when we are responding, or we are formulating our own contributions for this conversation tonight. How do we reconcile the notion of God's sovereignty over government with the concept of human free will and moral responsibility? Issues of moral order. How do we explain the role of government in promoting moral order and justice if they are established by God? How does this apply to governments that commit human rights abuses, like corruption, for example? Um, there is also, of course, the other side that we might look at. Another question that is from this one is like, answer posing questions to the positive dimension, that is like challenging those that are for the idea that God is the sovereign ruler of the universe. But there is also, if you flip the coin to the other side, some biblical texts support the idea of divinity, that is like idea of the divinely ordained authority, that there's authority that is ordained by God. How do you interpret this text in light of examples of unjust rulers and oppressive regimes? The list goes on. I will try, as I said, my apologies for that. I mean, I should have had these questions really formulated and projected so that we can follow. But this is what we are dealing with. This is what we are talking about here on Bible Hard Talks tonight. Um, really, the ball is in your court. How do you see this matter? God and governance. Is God the ruler of the universe? Are we stretching the mark far if we say that He is in charge of everything, including all governments? Or He is the ruler of the universe to a certain extent? What does that mean if it is to a certain extent? Pastor Jude Fash mentioned something there where John, the evangelist, John is mentioning, is talking about Satan being called the God of this world. How do we make sense of that? This is the conversation we're having here tonight. Wonderful people. Thank you very much for showing up. Thanks for being here. And as the Ms. VO at my bullet calls mentioned, if you have any thoughts, if you have things that you want to punctuate, just drop them on the TL. Let's hear you out. Use the hashtag Bible Hard Talks or request a mic and let's have a conversation. Let's talk. If you are here already and you have the mic before you, this is what we're going to do, wonderful people. I know that you have a lot of content and it's been 6 months. It's been, we've been waiting to drop this powerful knowledge. Even though we have a license from Mr. VOKO, that goes your vala, goes your close. Let's just try to shrink our points in a way. If it were for me, but I think we will do that. Maybe implement that. Maybe next week. Moving forward, is having kind of like that conversation whereby you say something that is profound, we stop you, and then we kind of like drag more of that profound statement, and then someone interacts with that, and then we move on like that. But we'll see. But for tonight, we're gonna just free flow. But then in the free flow, let's just be mindful of the time. And I think I have a timer. That is, if it happens that the co-hosts don't have timers, I have the timer because I am mindful of the people like Rabbi Jules that will be working tomorrow. So I'm standing for them. I am team those who are working tomorrow. If you know, you know. All right, ladies and gents. Let's do this. What we're gonna do right now, we're gonna throw the cables to Prince Tyler. Prince Tyler, the cables are yours, man. Let's hear you out.
So I guess the phrasing of the topic is that it has to assume that a person already believes in God. And if they already believe in God, then of course they will think that God is going to help governance. However, there are, I guess, people like me who live my life every single day without any sort of belief of any sort of God, higher power. And so I don't necessarily see, I guess, God as the sort of ruler of the universe. When it comes down to the questions of governance and I guess where the ideas of governance comes from, I think it could be explained largely based upon scientific evidence. Let's take, for example, our cousins, like, the great apes. When you look into, like, the data and pure observation, you notice that basically with a pack of apes, that more or less there's a hierarchy about, who is actually the leader and who are actually the subordinates. And so I would assume, based upon this sort of information, that government is like a manifestation of that from a purely, you can say, evolutionary point of view, largely because we depend on people who are higher than us. We elect the people who do our job, who want to do like our, I guess, whatever we want, right, for like, services. And so I would say that government is actually a continuation of what the great apes also do, our cousins as well. And so I would say that ideas of governance, like, the ideas of philosophy, it comes directly from the ancient Greeks, for example, or the idea of democracy, again, comes directly from the ancient Greeks. When it comes down to the idea of liberalism, the idea of liberalism comes directly from John Locke. And so I would say, from a purely, you can say, human point of view, that we are, I guess you can say, younger in comparison to something like, this extinct, like, the Neanderthals or like, other kind of Homo species that were part of like the evolutionary chain. And that gradually over time, we began to make systems of rules and powers for the benefit of everybody else. And so what we do is that we basically just vote on like, laws and vote on people, like what's like the best representation for our views. How can we actually have like, this sort of sense of justice? And so we kind of develop these sort of systems through a natural process. And so I think by this sort of sense that by appealing to naturalism and also appealing to, I guess, the ideas of evolution, that we ourselves are our own personal rulers. We're the ones that determine our outcomes. And so when you make an argumentation, for example, that say, God is the one that basically helped everybody else, then you have a big problem, largely because there are some systems in other parts of the world that might not have the same sort of Western democracy style like, everybody else. Let's take, for example, for the case of like, China, because China has like, the Communist Party over there. And so you're basically saying that God chose that person to actually oppress, everybody else in China. And so you need to also take into consideration like the other kind of systems, like governments that people have also developed. And so if you're going to say that God is the ruler of the world, you need to also consider the question about these other kind of systems that might violate other human rights too. And so I would say that we ourselves are the sole determining factor about like, what's good or bad, what's right and wrong. We're the ones that are actually create our own personal destinies.
Prince Tyler. Thank you very much, Prince Tyler. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that. That's a grand opening right there. Thank you very much for that. When it comes to governance, we must factor in that we have ourselves outside governments, outside systems. We have we have the capacity to make our own rules and make our own judgments beside outside systems, and also that the systems of the world, they differ. What about those systems whereby the government, they oppress, or the people of those governments, they are oppressed? How then do we make of that? Are we saying that it is God? And Prince Tyler is saying that he doesn't subscribe to the notion of God. So if he doesn't, if let's say you don't subscribe to it, what happens then? How do we then? Because as he said earlier on, right, that you have to presuppose, or the topic presupposes that God exists. So God must exist for God to be the supreme ruler of the universe. And Prince Allah is saying that, but what if you don't subscribe to that? What happens then? That we must factor in these matters. Very interesting. Indeed, Prince Tyler. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that. Prince Tyler, in us, the systems, us being divorcing ourselves from the systems, from the governing systems, which in this case, now we are saying that, let's say these systems, they are from God, or if not from God, the pattern. Maybe let me put it like this, Prince Tyler. Would it be better to say that to say that in your case that the governance is not from God, but the inspiration, the direction for the governance is coming from God? Can it be possible? Is that possible, or we just have to rule out the God factor completely?
I would say that at least in the Western context, that there is like no doubt that at least for many systems of governments or political ideas, it comes not necessarily from God, but from Christians themselves. Early in my submission, I mentioned about John Locke. Besides the fact that he was also known for the ideas of liberalism, he's also known for the ideas of materialism, and he considered himself to be a Christian. And so there's obviously, some sort of Christian, you can say, influence on the way that certain people run the governments, at least in Western contexts. And so I would say it would be Christian influence for some systems like governance, but not necessarily God itself that allow those kind of systems to exist.
Prince Tyler. All right, Prince Tyler. I hear you. I hear you. Of course, the idea of Christians, as you know, there is behind the Christian, there is the Christian God. So somehow there is an element of agreement there. But we'll have that one as we move forward. I think the VOK wants to interact with you briefly there. Mr. VOK, cables are yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Mr.
Host, am I
VOK?
audible?
Yes,
Am I
sir.
okay? Thanks, host. I think I just wanna the conversation to go along, but I'd like to pull on a thread that I think was interesting from what Tyler mentioned, and it's the he speaks about so he alludes to the great apes, right? And speaks to the governance systems that you may see in nature, and how animals order their hierarchies and interact in their hierarchies and maintain them, which I think is a good uh, is a good aspect for us to break down, right? In because from I want to hear from you, Tyler. What would you attribute that tendency to order ourselves for not just for humans but for animals as well, or whatever wherever in nature that you see these kind of governance systems playing out? What would you attribute that to? Would you attribute it to the intelligence of those animals, or what would you attribute it to? Because, like you said, it goes. You see it going further than the arrival of just human beings on the earth. You see it to our you see it in our in the great apes, or our so-called ancestors. So seeing that you see it going back that far, what would you attribute this phenomenon or this tendency to?
If I had to make a educational guess, again, I want to emphasize this is my own personal guess right here, that I would say survivability is like, one factor, because if all the animals go around and just hunt each other, right? There's like zero survivability for that species for it actually to exist. And so they consider survivability as one factor. And they also consider, like, personal bonds, personal connections. And that's how something like, maybe like, the great apes or these other kind of animals continue to survive, because if they're always fighting against each other, there's like zero survivability. And so I would say there must be some sort of implanted, some sort of empathy that I guess the animals have, including us, to continue to live on forever.
Awesome, awesome. That's very interesting, Prince Tyler. So I just wanna again I just wanna know, since you see it, if it's then a matter of survivability, do you see it as a conscious thing that the animals make, or is it intuitive? Is it more something that they program to do, or is it something that you think they actively choose to do to set up governance systems that ensure not only their individual survivability, but if I've not misinterpreted what you were saying, but also survivability of the species in light of evolution. What would you say? Is it more conscious, or is it a subconscious thing, and where does that come from?
That is really a tough question because obviously, when you look at some, I guess, animals, it's kind of hard to say, like, what kind of animals are, like, more conscious than other animals. I would say, like, maybe some have lesser in comparison to other animals. And so, like I was mentioning before, I was assumed that, something like the great apes will have probably more consciousness, more self-awareness in comparison to maybe some other animals. And so I think there might be some sort of hierarchy between, like, what kind of animals have more consciousness than other animals. And so I would say, like, something like the great apes, like I said earlier, probably like in the same sort of level, like maybe like us.
Thanks so much, Prince Tyler. Yeah, host. Before I hand it over to you, I think this is one of the critical, I think, aspects of the conversation. Because if we're going to look at or at governance as a phenomenon in nature, and particularly in human nature, um, and we're gonna look broadly and say that, well, governance is something that plays itself out in how living systems organize themselves, or living beings organize themselves. Then the question of the ontology of that intuition to governance comes in, and of course, survival would be the go-to factor to say that we order ourselves in governance systems in order to survive. But again, the it begs the question that that survivability as a keyword, where does that intuition come from, and how does nature write that into our systems to be inclined towards survivability? And also, if you look at just the manifestation of the opposite, which is destruction in the systems. But that, I think, would be going too far. Just the issue of the ontology, and where governance as a phenomenon comes from, is one question that I think could lead us to the conclusion of whether God is in fact the source of governance, and does govern the world, or if not God, then what else? Over to you, host.
Mr. VOKO, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much, Prince Tyler. Thanks for that. That was marvelous, Prince Tyler. Thank you very much for that, Mr. VOKO. Very very interesting take there. Beautiful questions. Beautiful conversation with Prince Tyler as well. Stretching that conversation just a little bit there, Mr. VOKO. I like the point of the intuition, and I love the fact that Prince Tyler also kind of augmented the weightiness of that point, right? It's quite an interesting one in this conversation. But someone can ask Mr. VOKO, as much as that point is weighty, why should the intuition necessarily come from somewhere? Why can't it be viewed as independent of any higher power? It's just intuition. It's just more like, if I have feelings, I have feelings for say another woman somewhere who is Miss Universe. I have feelings for Miss Universe. They, although I know where you would come with that, but let's just look at it from just a punctiliar moment. Why should the intuition be attributed to something outside the human being?
Well, host. I think I see this as well, like you. I believe as part of the meat and bones of the conversation, right? Discovered or agreed maybe that this phenomenon of governance and hierarchy systems is so prevalent in nature that it needs explaining, because well, I think our minds would be driven to try and explain what we see. I mean, you look at the governance systems of ants even. Prince Tyler was talking about more developed and advanced systems, or conscious beings like the great apes and ourselves. But even, lots of studies have been done in ants themselves to see how they organize their particular systems. You can talk about bees, you can talk about, everything in nature. And then I think that's the root of saying that this thing of governance begs the question. I know in the Bible it then comes to say that um, if we look at God, well, with the scriptures that we've mentioned, we look at God being the ruler of human governance, but just governance as a broad phenomenon itself. The first thing I would say is that it would beg explanation, right, as a phenomenon. But then, following from that, that's where I think your question would then come in to say, well, why can't we just say that it's something that happens? It's something that's part of the universe, part of the system. I think that's a conclusion that we would arrive at once we have determined maybe that no, it can't be from God, it can't be from the Christian God. Then as a conclusion, we would then turn to say, well, maybe governance is a big accident of the universe itself. But I think one counter question to that then would be, well, it's not just the phenomenon of governance. I think um, uh, governance is also an indication of something else, because we've based, laws on how the universe organizes itself. And then that's where you would go maybe into science, the scientific disciplines, to say that, in physics we see this phenomenon of laws and them being constant and them driving the world. In other words, the idea of why should those uh, laws, if we can say that, or phenomena, for the sake of this discussion, why should they be constant and um, seem to be ever present in the universe, whereas the case could be the opposite, where destruction is the norm, as we see in maybe arguments like fine tuning. So I think that's part of the that's part of threshing the wheat and separating the wheat from the weeds, host. I don't know if I answered your question.
It's the VOK one. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that. You did diplomatically so. But thank you very much for that. No, you did respond to it, but of course it needs still a teasing out. There, it still needs a teasing out, and it's an interesting take that you're taking there. I'm really interested at this point. I hope you can be able to bring it back again while we're having the conversation. It's really really interesting, and Prince Tyler maybe bouncing back with more refined thoughts, because I think Prince Tyler was getting to something there in his response as well when you're having the conversation together. Thank you very much for that, gentlemen. I'm supposed to throw the cables there to Nihi Justice, but Nihi has a rule that if there's a lady before him, that lady must occupy the stage. She must get the mic. Lebza is here. Her hand is up. So I will not go to Nihi. I'll throw the cables to Lebza. Lebza, cables are yours. Over to you. Let's hear you out. How's it? God and governance. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Brother Bangandi. Firstly, can I please engage Ukoketso and Prince Tyler, because there's no way Brother Bongani was away for like 6 months, and uzangama systems and universe, and as it being a causative power or influence in us governing ourselves. I'm like, okay, no. And Tyler, I just have a question, that if you say that matters of governance are because of we are a self-determining people, we have the capability to actually draw that out of ourselves, then what's causing us to fail? What's causing the government and the democracy and all of that to fail? Because I can tell you now that we thought the EU had it, they were doing things right, but they are also failing as well. So if we are self-determining in terms of governance, why are we failing? That's my question before I go to my submission.
I think the most simplistic answer is that we're prone to corruption. We're just prone to corruption because sometimes corruption can manifest itself to many ways. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's power. There's like a lot of factors to corrupt people. So,
What causes corruption? Why is men corrupt?
well, sometimes men could be, I guess, corrupted by greed. And so, as soon as I think there's like a famous phrase, like, if you give someone an inch, you give them a mile, right? So, as soon as somebody, get a lot of money, that's how they get corrupted or some sort of other motivating factor.
This is what happens when you take God out of the equation, Tyler. You start to be creative, right? You start to be a makeup artist.
It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. He's your only black friend, so he's your best black friend. I won't trade him for another black friend, because black friends are rare, as you should be aware. He smiles like Richard Pryor, so just sit and stare. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler. It's everyone's friend, it's Tyler.